Okay, and we're back. We were talking about the how, standards emerge, the emergence of standards. And let's now just give you a few examples. These are companies that own these technical standards. For example, Microsoft is the standard when it comes to PCs operating systems, and that's the Windows is their standard, right? The Windows operating system. For uh, this is probably before your time, but maybe some of you remember a VHS system, right? Videotapes, video cassette recorders. That was the standard. Matsushita owned that video or the VHS system standard, which became the dominant, 95% of all video cassette recorders sold were using that same standard, right? In programming language for web apps, Java is the standard and is owned by Sun Microsystems. For high definition DVDs, Blu-ray, right? Sony. So the question is then, how can we have get a standard or get a certain technology to become a standard? So we can talk about this now in the in competing for standards. How can we compete for standards? And we can talk about two different approaches to operating in this high technology or innovation field. We can see it on a spectrum from closed or tight to an open or loose approach. On the one side, the open or loose approach maximizes market acceptance. In other words, we don't hold our technology very tight. For example, if we have patents on it, we don't just try to have a very remember we talked about a regime of appropriability where we try to have, capture all the profits. This is like the opposite of that. In this sense, we're trying to maximize the market acceptance. On the other side, we try to maximize value appropriation. So this would be like having this very strong, tight regime of appropriability where we don't share the technology. We try to have, protect it with secrecy and lead time and complementary resources. And we try to maximize the economic value that we extract out of this innovation. On the other side, we're willing to give the technological standard. We're trying to, let it become accepted. We might even give the technology to our competitors. Like, for example, um, Sony, right, and Matsushita, they were competing for the video cassette, video recorder market. Sony was actually first to market with the Betamax, and it actually was a better quality product and with higher quality image, and it was a smaller tape, so the machines could actually be smaller. Sony was a powerhouse and had great distribution and great marketing and sales. So you would think that being first with a better product they would be the ones that would, be the ones that would eventually be adopted as the standard. But it wasn't like that. What happened, Matsushita actually ended up licensing the VHS technology to its competitors, exactly like what IBM did with its clones. It allowed the IBM PC to be cloned by other makers. And that's what helped, the IBM become the standard in the market as well. So the VHS approach, they tried to, maximize market acceptance and then in that way develop a standard. And what ended up happening, well, Betamax dropped down to just 5% of market share. And they lost the standard war. Same thing with IBM and PC versus the Apple Mac. IBM licensed out the technology and this kind of standard approach to making the PC, the framework and the infrastructure, and Apple dropped down to something like, 8% market share. So these two different approaches, one maximizes the market acceptance and therefore, maximizes the ability to adopt, to make this a widespread adoption of the standard. You may not realize this, but there's another standard being fought even at this time. A few years ago, I actually had a consulting project about this, about bringing the wireless charging technology to Turkey. I was consulting for a company that was making furniture, components and furniture, so like very special furniture components, like mechanized things. And they were considering bringing, putting components into their furniture that would be charging stations. But the problem was there were two different standards. One is from this wireless power consortium. They call it the QI, Qi standard. And the other one was from PowerMat. The PowerMat, I forget what the A stands for. And PowerMat was supported by Procter and Gamble, but the Qi consortium has, as the name implies, the wireless power consortium, they had this huge group of manufacturers. So although Procter and Gamble was backing PowerMat, and Procter and Gamble is obviously a huge company, this wireless power consortium also was a huge, this huge consortium and base of users. So this, wireless charging, nobody wanted to make a move. None of these, this furniture player, the furniture company, they didn't know which one would become a standard. And it kind of slowed down the adoption actually, because no one was willing to make investments in the infrastructure, because if they make investments in one infrastructure and it's not compatible with the other one, then they would be in a bad situation. So if you look at this time when I made this up, this was back in 2012, there was 109 companies that were signed on to this wireless power consortium. And you can see there's lots of big ones like Panasonic, Onkyo, Philips, this is the full list. You can see that there's also some of the bigger ones like HTC, Nokia, back then it was, still big, Motorola, Energizer was actually, because Procter and Gamble, they were using the, not Energizer, what's that? Duracell. That's what they came in with, the Duracell battery. That was the one that was backing the PowerMat. And you see, lots and lots of company, Philips, Panasonic, Samsung, and Ericsson, Sony. So all these companies, they were committed to bringing this particular standard of the Qi standard, wireless charging. And the battle that they were facing then was like, how would they become, the number one standard, and convince basically the entire world to use their particular technology. It's a very old technology. This wireless charging goes back to what's his name? Gosh, I just drew a blank. But this famous researcher. Oh, you know his name. I'm gonna have to keep moving on. But if I could edit the video, I would come back and put his name. I can't believe I can't think of his name right now off the top of my head. But he was like unfairly treated. He was this kind of genius, and he invented all these things. Anyway, you'll get it. So the key is then that they wanted to put these charging stations and build like an ecosystem of chargers, right? So that you'd have them everywhere, at McDonald's, Starbucks, public transportation, buses and airports, and in home, the home. So all you have to do is that with your phone, instead of having to plug your phone charger in, you just put the phone down anywhere that has these charging stations, and wirelessly it would just charge. Like here's showing it at Starbucks. So I actually got the first wireless charging back then. I got the first one ever in Cyprus, one of the first ones probably ever in Turkey as well, well before these things ever were sold in stores, just because I was dealing with this project. So it was funny. I'd show the class, and I had this thing. My phone was able to charge wirelessly. At that time, they were so amazed. Nowadays, it's kind of old. It's maybe 8 years now. Um, So yeah, now the thing is, other companies are trying to get um, partners, right? You have these electronic technology producers. You've got now IKEA. You've got companies like Starbucks and McDonald's, all trying to jockey for position and figure out where should they invest. Who's going to be the wireless charging leaders. So IKEA is trying to figure out, well, do they put these, Qi, the wireless power consortium with the Qi standard, or do we use the power mat standard? So it's a real and true standards war, and it still has not yet been won because there's so much at stake, so much money to be made, and so much power on each side. Um, After a time, I think the Procter and Gamble Power Mat, the Duracell Power Mat, they actually got Jay-Z as a spokesperson, if I'm not mistaken. So the question is, how do we fight these standards wars? First, we determine the potential for the emergence of standards. We analyze the network externalities. Remember, we said that these network effects or network externalities make the value of the product or the value of the technology or the innovation, that it changes according to the number of users. So if you have, like with telephones, the more users you get, the more value the telephone has, right? Um, so we figure out, are there network externalities that we can exploit? We try to assemble allies. We enlist partners, customers, complementers, competitors to build a bandwagon effect, right? Remember the bandwagon effect? In the days before mass communication technology, that during political rallies, they would just put a band on the back of a wagon and then draw the wagon through town, and then everybody would follow, listening to the music, and they would all show up at the political rally, right? So the more people that are in following behind, the more people are going to join. So you try to build this bandwagon using customers and complementers, even competitors. You give the technology to them to try to get as many people on board, and you try to preempt the market. You try to build a user base quickly. So you try to enter early, be a first mover, attract key customers like, for example, Starbucks or McDonald's. You try to get big customers, and you use low penetration pricing, right? You price it low to make it easier for people to buy it. And then you manage expectations. You try to use launch and pre-launch publicity and promotion to convince the market that you will be the winner. And this is what Duracell did with Jay-Z. They got him on board, and they kind of acted like they had already won the battle. So it's like there's no use fighting anymore. Everybody, tries to sell the fact that they are the winners. And this is typical also in political advertising. So, how can the winner sustain the standard? If you're the winner, don't fall behind on technology, and ensure backward compatibility so that your standard is also, usable with the previously existing standard. Meet the threat of disruptive technology by offering customers a migration path. That is, allowing them to find a way to, that your existing technology is going to be compatible in the future with new technology. and then reinforce the standard with other resources like strong branding. Okay, I'll come back and finish up another short video.